You finally did it. You checked your bank account this morning, and for the first time in your life, you saw a number with 6 digits in it. $100,000. And honestly, you just sat there. Maybe you refreshed the page twice just to make sure it was real. And then, after about 30 seconds of feeling like an absolute legend, a new feeling crept in. A quiet, uncomfortable one. Because now you're thinking, okay, what do I actually do with this? And here's the thing. That moment right there, that pause, that slight panic, that's actually the most important financial moment of your life. Not the moment you made the money, the moment you decided what to do next. Because most people, and I mean most people, get this completely wrong. They either park it in a savings account and feel responsible, or they go spend it on something that feels like investing but absolutely isn't, or they hand it off to some financial advisor they found through a Google ad and just hope for the best. Look, I'm not here to make you feel bad. Getting to $100,000 is genuinely hard. Studies show that only about 18% of Americans under the age of 40 have even crossed that threshold. You did something real, but crossing that line without a plan, that's where real wealth either gets built or quietly dies. So, today we're going to talk about exactly what to do once you hit that first $100,000. Not theory, not vague advice. The actual sequence, the actual mindset, the actual moves that separate people who eventually hit $1 million from the ones who stay stuck at $100,000 for the rest of their lives. And I promise you, by the end of this, you're going to see money in a way you've never seen it before. Let's start with what most people actually do, because I think you need to hear this out loud. So, you save $100,000. Maybe it took you 3 years, maybe 5. You sacrificed, you skipped vacations, you cooked at home when your friends were at restaurants, and now you've got this number sitting there. And the first instinct for almost everyone is to protect it, to not mess it up, to be careful. And that instinct, while emotionally understandable, is actually the single biggest mistake you can make at this stage. Here's a stat that should genuinely bother you. The average high-yield savings account right now is paying somewhere around 4 to 5% interest. That sounds okay, right? But inflation historically runs at about 3% over the long term. So in real terms, your money is barely growing. You're essentially running on a treadmill, moving fast, sweating, exhausted, and going nowhere. And if you're in a traditional savings account, some of those are still paying 0.5% or less. You're literally losing purchasing power every single day that money sits there. Your $100,000 today will buy you less stuff in 10 years if it's just sitting in a bank account. That's not me being dramatic. That's just math. So, the first thing I want you to accept, genuinely accept, not just nod at, is that sitting still is a decision. Doing nothing is a choice, and it's usually the most expensive one. Now, before we talk about what to do with the $100,000, we need to talk about something people always skip, and it drives me absolutely crazy when I see it. You cannot invest properly if your financial foundation has cracks in it. Think of your finances like a house. You wouldn't build a second floor if the ground floor wasn't solid, right? So, before we start talking about index funds and real estate and all of that, I want you to ask yourself 3 questions. 1. Do you have high-interest debt, anything above 7 or 8%? 2. Do you have an emergency fund? Real talk, 3 to 6 months of actual living expenses in a liquid account. And 3, are you already contributing enough to get your full employer 401k match if you have one? If the answer to question 1 is yes, you have high-interest debt, stop. That's where the first part of your money goes. I don't care how excited you are about the stock market. Paying off a credit card at 22% interest is a guaranteed 22% return. There is no investment on earth that reliably gives you that. None. Paying off high-interest debt is the highest returning, lowest risk investment available to you right now. And if you don't have an emergency fund and something goes wrong, your car breaks down, you lose your job, a medical bill shows up, you're going to be forced to pull money out of investments at the worst possible time. That's how people go from $100,000 back to $50,000 in a bad year and never recover psychologically. So, debt paid off, emergency funds solid, employer match captured. Now we can talk about the actual money. Here's where it gets genuinely interesting. Once your foundation is solid, your $100,000 essentially becomes a tool. And like any tool, it's only useful if you know what you're trying to build with it. So let me give you the framework that actually works. Think of your money as having 3 jobs. The first job is to grow in the background, automatically, consistently while you sleep. The second job is to create opportunities, to give you the ability to say yes to things that come up, whether that's a business idea, a real estate deal, or even just a career pivot without financial panic. And the third job is to eventually replace your income entirely so that working becomes a choice, not a requirement. Most people only ever focus on job 1, and even then, they do it wrong. Let's fix that. The single most powerful thing you can do with a significant portion of your $100,000, and I'm talking about probably 60 to 70% of it, is put it into low-cost, diversified index funds consistently and then leave it alone. Now, I know that sounds boring. I know you've seen people on social media talking about options trading and crypto and this one stock that's about to explode and all of that. And look, some of those people made real money. A small number of them. But here's a fact from Standard & Poor's that I want tattooed somewhere in your brain. Over any given 15-year period, roughly 92% of actively managed funds underperform the S&P 500 index. 92%. These are professional fund managers with teams of analysts in Bloomberg terminals and decades of experience, and they still can't consistently beat a simple index fund that tracks the market. Warren Buffett, arguably the greatest investor in human history, has literally said in his own will that when he dies, his wife's inheritance should go into a 90% low-cost S&P 500 index fund. If that's good enough for Warren Buffett's family, it's probably good enough for us. So, what does this look like in practice? You open a brokerage account, whether that's a Roth IRA, a traditional IRA, a taxable brokerage account, ideally some combination depending on your tax situation, and you put money into something like VOO, which tracks the S&P 500, or VTI, which gives you the entire US market, or a target date fund if you want something completely hands-off. And then, and this is the critical part, you don't touch it. You let compound interest do what compound interest does. Let me show you what that actually looks like. If you invest $70,000 of your $100,000 into an index fund today, and the market returns its historical average of about 10% annually, in 30 years, that $70,000 becomes roughly $1.2 million without you doing anything, without you stressing, without you checking the market every morning, just time doing its thing. That's not magic. That's patience. Now let's talk about the rest of the money, because this is where people either make really smart decisions or really impulsive ones. With the remaining 30 to 40%, you have a few options, and which one makes sense for you depends on where you are in life. But I want to walk you through the 2 that I think deserve the most serious consideration. The first is real estate. And before you say, I can't afford a house with $30,000, hear me out, because buying a primary residence isn't necessarily what I'm talking about. I'm talking about using a portion of your capital as a down payment on an investment property, a rental property that generates monthly cash flow. Now, is this more complex than index investing? Yes. Does it require more work and education? Absolutely. But the reason real estate creates so many millionaires is because of a concept called leverage. When you put $30,000 down on a $150,000 rental property, you're controlling a $150,000 asset with $30,000. If that property appreciates by 5%, you haven't made 5% on your money. You've made 5% on $150,000, which is $7,500, a 25% return on your initial $30,000 investment. That's leverage working for you. And that's before we even talk about the rental income, the tax benefits, or the fact that your tenant is essentially paying down your mortgage every month. Is real estate for everyone? No. It requires research, a local market you understand, a risk tolerance for being a landlord, and ideally some cash reserves for when things go wrong, because things always go wrong. But if you're willing to learn it, it's one of the most reliable wealth-building tools in existence. The second option for that remaining capital is investing in yourself and your income-generating potential, and this one gets almost zero attention in personal finance conversations, which is insane to me because here's the reality. Your biggest wealth-building asset at this stage of your life isn't your savings account, it's your income. The more you earn, the more you can invest, the faster you build wealth. It's that simple. So allocating some of your capital towards skills, education, certifications, or even starting a side business that increases your earning potential can generate returns that no stock market can match. Think about it this way. If you spend $5,000 learning a skill that gets you a $20,000 raise, that's a 400% return in 1 year. No index fund is giving you that. And unlike a stock, that raise compounds every year for the rest of your career. I'm not saying blow your savings on some random online course. I'm saying be strategic. Identify the specific skill or credential that creates the most leverage in your field, invest in it intelligently, and watch your income and therefore your investment rate accelerate. Now, here's something nobody talks about enough, and I think it might be the most psychologically important part of this whole video. Once you hit $100,000, you're going to start getting advice from everyone. Your uncle who flipped a house in 2005, your coworker who put their whole 401k into one tech stock and made 60% last year, that guy at the gym who won't stop talking about some cryptocurrency you've never heard of. And the advice is going to sound convincing because everyone who made money doing something is absolutely certain that their way is the only way.